about water and urban places. This is Ideanthro. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Ideanthro. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about some recent and not so recent bioretention filter media research that I've been involved with and which I'm making available, like not just the results of the research, but the raw data itself, because it points to some interesting little findings. And so we want to make that available, the data available for that, for you to look at and find out about. So this video is all about explaining what that research is, how it was undertaken, what some of the findings were, where you can find the data, and so on and so forth. So to give this a little bit of context, this research started in 2015 and then was followed up in 2017. So in 2015, I was working Healthy Waterways at the time, and I engaged a couple of Griffith University students, Nem Crow and Karan Bruck, to help me with this research. And then, come 2017, we followed up, repeated some of it, tweaked some of it, with the help of a third student, Callan Murray, also from Griffith Uni. All of those three students were completing their industrial affiliates program placement right at the end of their degrees. And I'm very grateful for all of their help. The research came about because at the time, so like in 2014, possibly even before, but then leading into early 2015 when the research first happened, I started to develop some hypotheses about why potentially we're seeing so many bioretention systems with the plants failing in them. So there are literally thousands of bioretention systems that have been built in Australia. Many of them stood the test of time. Many of them, however, have not. And one of the ways that systems sometimes don't stand the test of time is through the vegetation dying. And at the moment, as I stand now, I've got a couple of hypotheses about this. One of which is that I think inappropriate maintenance practices is the cause of it. We've talked about that previously on Ideanthro. And the other one is that the filter media itself just isn't hospitable for plant growth. And that's what this research aimed to dig into. Because there's a balancing act in here, we've talked about this at length before, but because there's this balancing act here between sometimes the parameters that might make for really amazing soil to grow plants in might also lead to some undesirable characteristics for pollutant removal and otherwise for bioretention performance. So we're treading, when it comes to filter media and trying to keep plants alive, we're treading this balance with also having the system function as a bioretention system. So we set out to try and investigate this. And what we did, what Nem and Karan did in the first bit of sampling, was we picked 6 bioretention systems throughout southeast Queensland that were a mix of systems that were older and had stood the test of time, in which I deemed to have healthy vegetative communities and had those communities and they had lasted, and some systems where that wasn't so much the case, systems where the plants were struggling. And we picked 6 sites specifically, and I'll show you these now. So one of them we picked here. It's known as Outlook or Outlook Drive. It's in an estate called Woodlands. It's Woosod Map ID. So if you go to ideanthro.com/the-woosod-map, you can actually find out where all these sites are. So its Woosod ID is B00162. And look, it's a really big bioretention system co-located with a detention basin and a park. It is a system where, although in that photograph you can see on the screen there, the plants look healthy, when you actually get down there and look into it, this is a system where the plants look really stressed. They are there and they are alive, but they do not look like they want to be there. System number 2, Bowenbilly Drive. This is one of the bioretention basins from the early stages of the Coomera water development. Woosod Map ID is B00043. It's a system where, in my opinion, the vegetation is doing really, really well. It has lost some of the understory plants over time, but then a whole bunch of casuarinas have self-seeded in, and it's functioning as an ecosystem of sorts, co-located with some bushland. It's a small to moderate sized bioretention basin. Scroll down next, Zeus Circuit, another bioretention basin at Coomera Waters. However, this one never got planted out, and honestly, it's a little bit funny, and I'm not even going to consider it in the results that we talk about today, because the reality is, once we investigated this system's a bit funny. There is filter media at the bottom. There's a heap of really thick clay sediment on top of it. In my opinion, yeah, it's a bioretention basin, but it's so far out of left field what's actually ended up in the ground here. I know like it was designed to be just a normal bioretention basin, but it's now so far out of left field here that we have some data for it, but I'm not really going to consider it in the data. Next one, Pendragon Drive. This is also at Coomera Waters, but it is a newer basin at Coomera Waters. Asset ID is B00045. This is a system that, you know, the plants have got established to some degree, but you can see in the photo there's a lot of bare patches. You really see that like this Lomandra is surviving, but a bunch of the other stuff has had a much harder time. And the filter media looks, looks a bit bare in there. Then we come down to site number 5, Hoyland Street. You have heard me talk about this before. This is the oldest bioretention system in Queensland. It's the second oldest bioretention system in Australia. It was built in 2001. It has a lovely bushland aesthetic to it. It has got a little bit weedy in recent years, but what is critically important, actually there's a few things that's critically important about this system. One of which is it's so old. 2, it still has healthy plants in it. 3, it has essentially never had any maintenance done to it. So Brisbane City Council, you know, they mow around the edge, they collect some litter, they unblock the outlet pit. They do not do any vegetative maintenance to the system itself, and yet it survived a very long time. Asset ID is B00005. Can you tell I was keen to put that one on the map? It's one of the very first. And the last one is Tilly Road, otherwise known as Wakeley. Again, another well-known bioretention basin in southeast Queensland. Asset ID is B00028. And it's an interesting one. It's got plenty of trees and vegetation at the front. It's part of a bigger system. There's 3 bioretention cells. We were looking at the middle cell. It's just under 1,000 square meters in size. Plants are pretty happy. So what we've got is this situation where we've got 3 bioretention basins where I feel that the vegetation's done quite well, being Bowenbilly, Hoyland, and Tilly. We've got 2 where it hasn't done so well, being Outlet and Pendragon, and then we've got Zeus, which we're essentially putting to the side because of some of the weirdness that happened there. Now you can find all this stuff, you can obviously see the page that I've just been showing you here. You can find all of this at www.ideanthro.com/filter media results. You can also, up the top of that page, you can find a download link to download the data itself. So literally to look at the raw data that we're talking about here, there is a download link at the top of the page. Okay, so what did we actually sample? So what we really initially went looking for here, we were like, look, we've got this concept of these systems, some of them being healthy plants, some of them not. We want to dig into whether there's any correlations with various filter media parameters. Now, I need to say something up front right now. We never set out doing this research for this to be like the definitive, this is what makes a good filter media piece of research. In fact, that entire concept's a little bizarre. There would be no one piece of research that would definitively answer that. But I want to make the point that what I was really looking for here was doing just enough work to see if there were any tidbits that someone should investigate further. Someone with more research credentials and credibility than me, because I don't really have any, but to do just enough to create, just to go look, is there something there that someone else should dig into further? Or is there something there that someone else should dig into further? That was the purpose of this research. Because you're gonna look at the way I talk about this and just the way I approach this, anyone with research credibility is gonna be like, hey, Jack, really? Like, that's not a particularly sophisticated way of looking at this. That's not my point. I'm not saying this is the be all and end all. I'm saying, should we be looking at these things further? Okay, so what did we test for? So we've got these 6 systems. We took a fair bit of samples in 2015. We sampled both near the inlet or inlets, but essentially the spot where we felt that most of the water got into the systems, and we sampled at the far end of the systems, as far away from all the inlets as we could be, but not necessarily next to the outlet, because sometimes the outlet's next to the inlet as well. But, so, inlet, far from the inlet, and we sampled at 2 depths. We sampled, so in all instances, scraped away any surface coverings, whether that was mulch, whether that was coarse sediment, whether that was fine sediment accumulated, scraped it away to expose the filter media surface. We then sampled from within the top 100 mils, so from 0, i.e. the surface, down to 100. And we kept digging deeper and took another sample from between 300 and 400 mils. So we've got a top sample and we've got a deeper type sample here. And we did that at both the inlet and the far end. And we took replicates of each. In each instance, we took in 2015, we took 5 replicates. In 2017, we took 4. So we've got a fair bit of samples from both inlet and far end, high up, bit lower down to look at here. And things that we sampled included, we did some in situ hydraulic conductivity at the time. Obviously, that's not actually a sampling of the media, that's in situ. But things that we looked for with the samples that we took were organic matter content, particle size distribution, pH, electrical conductivity. We also attempted to do some stuff with water holding capacity that didn't quite come off. The particle size distribution we attempted in 2015 but didn't quite come off, but then we redid it in 2017 and got some data there. And NEM in 2015 also did some measures of vegetation health. However, I'm going to talk about when I do talk about correlations with vegetation health here, I'm just going to talk about my more subjective opinion of what has a healthy ecosystem and what doesn't, rather than NEM's particular data here. So, having given you all that context, let me just check my notes here to make sure that I haven't missed anything in the story that we need to talk about. No, we are looking pretty good here. Okay, let's talk about what we found. So if you're playing along at home right now, you can, if you want to, download the spreadsheet, again from www.ideanthro.com/filter media results. That's all one word, filter media results, no dashes, spaces, or anything else. So what did we find? So the first thing that we're going to look at, and I'm going to pull up the spreadsheet here, the first thing that we're going to look at is that, in my opinion, so it's going to be organic matter. In my opinion, there is a fairly good correlation. I shouldn't say good correlation. The data hints at a correlation between the amount of organic matter in the filter media and my subjective assessment of the plant health. So what we've got to look at here, remember the sites that are not doing so well. So you can see Zeus all in red here and all blocked out here. Ignore Zeus. Also, there were some errors in the surface sampling of Pendragon the first time that we did it, so we can see those redded out as well. We've got the values that we got, but we don't think they're right. Then anything that's not red is stuff that we have some more confidence in here. So let's look at outlet. This is organic matter percentage here, very low percent organic matter. We can also then come across here to Pendragon. So this is 2015 for Outlook, 2017 for Outlook. We can come across to Pendragon where we have 2017 data, also very low organic matter contents. So those are the two sites where the plants are not doing so well. And compare that to, for example, Bo and Billy here, where we've got a higher organic matter percentage. It's not off the charts by any means, right? Not at all off the charts here. This is weight for weight organic matter contents, but it's definitely higher, right? We're going from like 0.5% in Outlook up to 4% here, and again, you're roughly 0.5% at Pendragon. We come across to Hoyland, and we see figures ranging anywhere from kind of the 2 to the 4% range. So again, it's a fair bit higher there. And we come across to Tilly, and we see values ranging from 1 to 2%. So it's not completely clear cut. It's not like, the poor sites are at 0.5% and the great sites are at 10% and like clear distinction. But there is a little bit of something pointing out here that, hey, look, the soils that we're talking about here, organic matter does vary in a way that appears to correlate with the sites where the plants are healthier. And that was the original hypothesis. Don't have enough to prove this, but we got something there. The next thing that I want to talk about here with organics is that one of the things that you might expect to happen in a bioretention basin is for, particularly in an older system that's got plants that are surviving over time, for the organics to accumulate in the top of the system, like on the surface, and that lower down you might have less organic matter. So this is from leaf drop. On the surface, creates a mulch, starts to break down bioturbators and the like, start to mix it in with the surface of the filter media. You might start to see higher percentages in the top layer than the bottom layer. But what we typically seem to see is that in some circumstances, so in Hoyland Street, for example, there is a fairly marked difference here. So the averages, so this is the average of every sample that we took from the top 100 mils in 2015 and 2017, we're getting about 4%. And then the averages of all the 300 to 400 mil samples, we're getting about the 2% range, right? So in Hoyland Street, it is fairly noticeable. There's half as much organic matter low down as there is high up. But, well, and similarly in Tilly, there's a little bit because we're going from like, say, in this case, 2%, maybe down to 1.6%, or 1.7% down to 1.1%. So it appears there might be something going on there at Tilly. But then we go across to Bow and Billy over here, where we also have trees, and we don't see any, I mean, we see maybe a little bit happening in the 2017 stuff, but it's 4 to 3.5%, you know, maybe that's something going on there. We're not seeing it in the 2015 data as well. So that's interesting. So some of the systems are accumulating, they look like they might be accumulating organics in the top of the system, or alternatively, like are losing organics out of the bottom at a rate quicker than they're replenished. Because ultimately, organic matter presence in the filter media in a system that's been there for a while is a balance of what's being lost over time through degradation, through breakdown, versus what's being replenished from leaf drop and from root growth throughout the system, right? So it's a balancing act here. So to say, you know, it's accumulating in the top, what that actually means is it's accumulating in the top more so relative to its loss from the top than the accumulation in the bottom relative to the loss from the bottom. Ugh. So then we look at some of the sites where the plants are not doing so well, and we see, for example, outlook. Well, actually, there is a bit there. Like, look at this here. We go from in the top 0.5 down to 0.3. Now, the absolute change there of 0.2% is not that much, and maybe that's within the error of the sampling. But from a percentage point of view, that's a fairly substantial percentage change between that. Same thing here. Like that 0.48 is 50% higher than that 0.32, right? So there's actually a bit of a sign of accumulation happening there. Whereas Pendragon, no sign of it whatsoever. So something to watch there. We know that just from general knowledge about how organics move through soils, that we should have these processes happening of build up and loss and so on and so forth, and that theoretically you'd expect them to build up more at the surface of the systems. But this will be interesting to watch over time to see exactly what's going on. Are there, more correlations? Do the systems that have more trees in them, like those two, particularly Hoyland, are they better at accumulating some organics over time compared to, say, a system that doesn't have the trees? Not sure. Interesting to consider there. Let's look at the next thing here. Yes. So, the first trend that we talked about here was the fact that the systems that have more organic matter in them tend to have, looks like there might be a correlation between the organic matter and the plant health here. What's very interesting about this though, so say if we're comparing Outlook with like 0.5% to Bow and Billy with around 4% organic matter here. What's critical is that if you were to talk about this in just casual terms, you might talk about these systems as the one with very little organic matter and the one with lots of organic matter. But in fact, that's not the case. What we're actually looking at here is the difference in a system with very, very, very little organic matter versus a system with a bit, but not that much, to be honest. Because at the moment, the most current filter media specification, as of December 2017 when I'm filming this, is in the CSC for Water Sensitive Cities Biofilter Adoption Guidelines. And those guidelines specify that organic matter content in bioretention systems should be less than 5% when the filter media is installed. And presumably, if that's important at that point, then we want that staying at less than 5%. Well, this is a really important little bit of research here, because what this is showing is that, hey, look, potentially going from 0.5%, let's say, up to 4%, or even in the case of Tilly, even possibly up to only 2% organic matter, is enough to make a really tangible difference to plant health. And what that brings into question, without having to like intuitively, a really high organic matter content should be good for plant health, right? So sometimes you're like, look, should we add more organics to get the plants really healthy? You might intuitively be like, oh, well, let's see if we can bump this up to like 10% organic matter, let's say. Let's get this really pumping. But this little bit of data, and I stress little bit of data, would seem to suggest that it doesn't need to be bumped up that high, but that there is a minimum threshold somewhere. And so therefore a specification that just says, look, you've got to keep the organic matter below 5%, this would suggest that that might not be appropriate. And that what might be more appropriate is to have a specification that said, hey, look, the organic matter needs to be between, say, 2 and 5%. Put a minimum threshold on it to avoid these really barren sites like Outlook and Pendragon, but keep the upper threshold, potentially, to make sure we don't go too high and don't start to cause nutrient leaching or don't start to have systems where the organics break down and the media slumps at some point later in time. Let's just get ourselves into a healthy range. This is really important for policy because this would point us towards needing upper and lower bounds rather than just upper bounds that we have at the moment. So moving away from organics for a moment, let's see what else. Let's go here. Okay, let's just touch really quickly on electrical conductivity. Electrical conductivity, bunch of values. I have not picked up any particular trends here that I'm curious to talk about. So just, you have a look at that. You get into the data, have a look there, but I haven't picked up anything. But let's now move to particle size distribution, because this one is a cracker. So let's just explain how this spreadsheet works. What we've got here are, in say these columns that I've just highlighted here is where we're looking at the Outlook system. And this is various different sizes of particle and what percentage fit into that. So what percentage of the particles in the first sample, top layer, near the inlet was greater than 710 microns. It was that, 3.9%, and so on and so forth. And then we go across through Bo and Billy, we go across through Zeus over here, and it keeps going to the right. What I found quite interesting about this is that, I need to give you some context for this. One of my first hypotheses when I started thinking about filter media parameters and their influence on plant health, in particular available water, I had wondered whether one of the problems with our filter media was a lack of fine particles, so whether they were just too sandy. And so I'd wondered whether we needed a mix to just encourage some more fines than the Forbes specification encourages. Because at the moment you can see this kind of highlighted down the bottom. It's not particularly well set out here, but effectively that the Forbes spec asks for very, very, very little, less than 3% in these really silts and clays fine particle. By the way, the sieve sizes we had for this research do not line up exactly with the sieve sizes identified in the Forbes spec, but I've done my best to line those up there, but it's not perfect. Just bear that in mind. But the Forbes spec asks for less than 3% of the really fine stuff, and then kind of biases us towards much more, at least 40% in these bigger sizes here. It's, some in these moderate ranges here. And one of my early hypotheses was, look, do we need to get more filter media at the fine end? This research is very interesting because what it shows is probably not. There's not a particular correlation between the sites where the plants are healthy and any particle size distribution that had more or less in the range of those small particles. Let's look at this. So Outlook, this is one of the sites where I've said, hey, look, the plants aren't doing so well. There are plants there, but they look pretty stressed out. Well, this site here, we've got roughly 1% in the fines, so it's fairly low. Well, we immediately go over here, and we've got roughly, 7, let's call it 7%. Let's call it 7% here in the, in kind of the small to medium range, in like the fine sands. So this is silts and clays, fine sands. So we've got roughly 7% in the fine sands, 1% in the silts and clays. We come across to Bo and Billy. Now we've got some more in the fine sands here. We've gone up to about 11%, so about 50% higher. But we've still barely only got more than 1% in the silts and clays. So it's not clear cut there. Now let's go across to Pendragon. This is a site where the plants are also a bit on the stress side. And we see very similar numbers to Outlook there. About 7%, a little under 1%. Okay, now something to bear in mind here, context I didn't give you earlier on, is that Outlook and Pendragon are the only two of the 4 sites we looked at, but 5 that were, only 2 of the 6 sites that were looked at, that were built with FORB compliant. So before the CRC water sensitive city spec that I mentioned before was out, there was the FORB specification. These are the only 2 sites that were built with FORB compliant media, because all of the other sites are a fair bit older. They were blended up with what people thought to be the best, most suitable material at the time, but it did not necessarily meet a given specification, like a given formal industry-wide specification. Obviously it met what they wanted to put in there. So what we've got here is that the 2 FORB spec sites, being Outlook and Pendragon, both have about 7% in the fine sands and about 1% in the silts and clays. Then we come across to Hoyland Street here. And in Hoyland Street, we do see not really much more, just a little bit more in the fine sands, but we do see a bit more in the silts and clays. But it only doubles, and critically, it's still within the FORB spec recommendations of less than 3%, which is still really quite low. We then come across to Tilly here, and this is really interesting. We see a little bit more in the fine sands, up to 8%, and we actually see some of our lowest readings for silts and clays here. And so remembering here that of the 2 sites we're looking at here, Hoyland and Tilly, are 2 of the 3 sites to where we judged the plants to be happier and a better and a nicer ecological community. And these sites here, don't have particularly high fine sands in them, and neither of them have massively high silts and clays, but one of them does have a bit higher than the other, and there's not a lot of difference. So this for me has really shot down any thoughts that I had for a while that maybe we needed to massively bump up the silts and clays content in bioretention filter media. I'm not seeing any evidence of that. What I'm seeing is evidence of healthy systems that have pretty low numbers. Now maybe if I wanted to be conservative, and I was still interested in this because we talked previously, we had a previous episode called Fine Balance, where I talked potentially about the benefit of having some fine particles in there for forming organomineral complexes. So maybe this would point towards, maybe we'd prefer closer to the 3%, like the 2 to 3% range, rather than the 0 to 1% range there. But again, we probably don't need to be pushing massively off the charts from what the FORB spec upper limits are about. This is really suggesting maybe we need a lower limit as well. Maybe we want to spec a range that's 2 to 4% or something like that. That maybe that's it. Maybe the fault here is not that the upper limit needs to be higher, but that we just need a lower limit, maybe just to make sure that accidental, perverse outcomes don't occur. But I would say that the argument for a lower limit here, given some of the numbers coming out of Tilly, and maybe the numbers coming out of Bow and Billy, they would suggest that a lower limit's potentially less important for the silts and clays than it is for the organic matter that we talked about earlier. And then the final thing that I want to talk to you about and show you here comes with pH. This is particularly interesting. Look at this. So I'll highlight here Outlook. So this is the raw data for Outlook from 2015 and 2017. From the inlet samples, all the different replicates we took of near the surface, deeper, near the surface, deeper, near the surface, deeper. Oh, I need to say something here. The way the spreadsheet's set out here is a little misleading. When we, for example, got these 2 here that say quadrant 1, near the inlet, 0 to 10, that does not literally mean, quadrant 1 in 2015 was not necessarily literally in the same spot as quadrant 1 2017. Those are not the same location. It's just it's a little misleading the way this is in the spreadsheet. I need to clarify that now. But look at this data here. Look at the way we've got, actually let's look at this. Let's look at the averages here. Averages for Outlook in 2015, 5.7 pH, down to 4.2. Bow and Billy, 5.3 down to 4.4. Pendragon, we have the deeper samples there, 5.7 down to 4.8. 5.2 down to 4.6 for Hoyland. 5.5 down to 4.4 for Tilly. They're all dropping, and they're all dropping like 1. They're dropping from the mid 5s to the mid 4s. Let's go down here, go back to Outlook. Now we're looking furthest from the inlet. 5.4 to 4.3, 5.4 to 4.5 for Bow and Billy. Come across to Hoyland Street, 5.3 to 4.7. Tilly, 5.5 to 4.3. With some readings, there's the odd reading here individually that was in the 3s there, right? This is worth bearing in mind. Now, there was no correlation with plant health here. Just every site, its pH dropped between the 2 years. And I don't know why. I'm trying to look into this. I'm trying to find out more about what might be going on here. Is this a general trend over time that the pH of bioretention filter media drops? Don't know. If that was the case though, you'd expect to see a difference between, say, Hoyland Street, which is a very old system here, 16 years old now, and say Outlook, which is only 6 or 7 years old. But in both these instances, say from the furthest from the inlet, Outlook in 2015 was 5.4 and Hoyland was 5.3. And then Outlook in 2017 dropped to 4.3 and Hoyland dropped to 4.7. If age was the factor at play here, then you would expect that the pH of, say, so Outlook was about 3 years old. Anyway, the point is, you'd expect them not to have, you'd expect Outlook and Hoyland not to have the same pH in the same year, but to have very similar pHs at the same age. And that's not the case. So age isn't a factor here. Maybe there was something about rainfall conditions between 2015 and 2017. It could have been time of year because the samples were not taken at the same time of year. That's really critical to understand. All these 2015 samples were taken in early in the year, like March, April, May sort of range, whereas the 2017 samples were taken in August or thereabouts. So it could be a seasonal factor. It's well worth watching. Also, it could be something else. What we need to check is if it's a trend. This is something that I will get more data on in the future. Might leave that certainly into either 2018, maybe even into 2019. But that's something we need to get more data on in the future because this is significant. Because when, like, some Australian native plants kind of like low pHs, but there's low and there's crazy low. And, you know, if this starts to get down too much below 4, this is going to get really inhospitable for a lot of species. So we need to understand what's going on there. You know, when it's in the 5 range, you'd probably be like, yeah, sweet, it's fine. In the 4s, you'd be like, getting a little low, but maybe still okay for a lot of these species. But going below 4, yeah. If that happens, that's potentially where things are going to start to get a little bit concerning. We're just going to have to get more data. What a pity. More fun bioretention research. Okie dokie. So that has been my kind of synthesis of what I've taken away from the data. Neman, Cran, and Callan have all drawn their own conclusions as well, but I just wanted to share with you a few things that spoke. Well, the pH just jumped off the page at us, full stop. But when it comes to the PSD and the organic matter, share with you some things that spoke to my original hypotheses and have helped to inform my thinking about what we need with respect to filter media specifications. So that's where we should start to wrap up this episode. So if you're interested in this, let's go a quick reminder where you can find more info. The best thing that you can do is go to www.ideanthro.com/filter media results, or one word, filter media results, and you can see a brief description of the research. You can download the Excel spreadsheet that I've just got in there, which tells you a little bit more about the research. You can also see some photographs about the sites. Have a poke around in there. If you get a chance, use the Worsted Map IDs to go and identify the sites, go and look at them in real life, go and check them out for yourself. That would be a very interesting thing to do. And if you're interested in this, if you're a researcher who wants to dig into this and wants more info from me about exactly what we did, because I know I haven't gone into all the details that one would need to in a journal article or the like, but if you want to know more, by all means, hit me up. You can find me at jack.mullally@ideanthro.com. And that's the end of the episode. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for paying attention while we got a little bit nitty gritty in some numbers in an Excel spreadsheet. Thank you also if you've listened to this on audio and haven't had the benefit of the visuals. I know that's a little on the difficult side to do, but hey, it's either that or no episode at all in audio, so it is what it is. And that's it. Thank you for tuning in. One last thought. The last one wasn't it. This really is the last thought. If you're watching these episodes regularly, but if you're relying on LinkedIn or YouTube or the like for this like pop up in a feed or through a notification, you can, if you want to, sign up to our newsletter where once a week we send you a direct link to the 2 episodes that have come out that week. If you want to do that, we don't send anything else. We don't spam or anything else. We just send links to the episodes. If you want to find out more, if you want to sign up for that, go to ideanthro.com, scroll to the bottom of the page, stick in your details there. It's really simple. Cool. Thank you for tuning in. That really was the last bit. Have a good one. We'll see you next time.
Before you go, our best episodes come from your questions. This knowledge base, these discussions that are Ideanthro improve with your contribution. So if there's a topic, an idea, a concept that you would like us to explore, come and ask us. You know where to find us. www.ideanthro.com/contact. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and that place you get your good podcasts from. You know where to find us. We look forward to hearing from you. We'll see you soon.